going on, Marvel fans? This is Judge with Judge Games, bringing you a Cosmic Trial build breakdown for Moon Knight. Let's start by looking at the powers I chose to run. I am using a ranged build. Crescent Launchers as my spam. I took Crescent Fan for the bleed and AoE ability. Tripwire Bolas for the immobilize as well as the bleed. For my statue, my cooldown, I chose to take Statue of Khonshu because I feel like Vengeance is a little risky for the Cosmic Trial. I took Explosive Crescent Dart for the increased damage versus bleeding. A lot of things are going to be bleeding. And the vulnerability, which is really important to increase your damage output. Of course, we have our movement power and our signature as well. I also took Angel Wing Attack Run. It's really a really good AoE option. Fire and Forget, lots of damage on an 8-second cooldown, and it doesn't interrupt your movement when you use it. For the talents, I took Fear of God, just because that increased damage to Gruesome Frenzy, as well as that increased generation of your resource, which allows you to use your big cooldowns more often. The second tier, I took Specialty Crescent Darts, which turns your Crescent Dart throw into Explosive Crescent Dart for an AoE effect. So you can apply vulnerability to more enemies at once, as well as doing decent damage to bleeded enemies, especially the ones that are stacked up. But more importantly in this talent, it causes your Crescent Launchers to bounce up to 4 enemies, which increases the damage of that ability by quite a bit. Allows you to hit enemies around corners if you're trying to hide from certain enemies, like the ones during the fight with Red Skull that lock onto you. You can kind of swing around the corner there, and as they come around, you can just hit the one and it'll bounce to people behind him or around the corner. It's just an overall very useful ability, and it kind of keeps your damage rolling there. I took Utility Crescents in the third tier, just for the increased Crescent Fan damage, max charges as well, so you can apply your bleeds a lot more often and do some increased damage there. And Tripwire Bolas deals damage over time, so this was a really important talent for my build. In the fourth tier, I took Launchers, which basically just turns your signature into a ranged ability. And being that I'm running a ranged build, it was really the only thing that made sense for me in this tier. The last tier here, I chose to take Terrifying Visage of Khonshu, because it pretty much guarantees a critical hit when you're not at max Khonshu's favor. And you guys will see that in, or probably did see that in the build, the trial video before this one, that I was critting pretty much every ability. So it really increases your damage output by a lot. I tried Facing the Madness for a while, and running Avatar of Vengeance, but the reduced damage by 30%, I just felt like that was too steep. I thought maybe 10% max would have been fair, but outside of the cooldown, I mean, you're doing no damage. So I chose to just stick with the Statue of Khonshu build. For synergies, it's pretty self-explanatory. I just took things that complement Moon Knight. We got range damage. I have some melee power damage in there as well, but I took that a lot for just the secondary effects of those synergies mostly. Infinity points. I put everything into health. I wanted to increase my base health because I like to play Moon Knight with his health a little bit
What's
lower
that, Khonshu?
than
You want me
max
to
for
kill
most
who?
of the time. So this made sense to me to increase my my base health by quite a bit. So when I'm a little lower down there, like I like to be, it's not as dangerous for me to be sitting there to take advantage of my trait here. Now while we're on the topic, let's go ahead and take a look at that trait. Fists of Khonshu increases your total damage done by 0.3% for each 1% health you are missing. So it's beneficial for Moon Knight to fight at half health or lower. Usually, I find that's a pretty safe place to be, especially with my infinity points and health. and it allows for it gives you a pretty big damage increase. Um, but also his next tooltip box over carbonadium armor, I think that's the way it's pronounced. But that also reduces all damage you take by 10% for every 25% of health you're missing, which is really, really good. Um, I think that's what makes Moon Knight work, because if you just had to be, running around low health on Moon Knight to do some decent damage, and you didn't have this ability, I feel like it would probably knock Moon Knight down a peg or two on the viability list. So let's look at my gear. Um, this video, like every video I've done, and probably every video I will do in the future, is done after the fact. So Moon Knight has been in Cosmic for I think 5 days, and I'm not gonna go farm a bunch of super heroic purple gear and do this on that just to show you guys it can be done, because it can be. Uh, and I've done it. I actually did do it on Moon Knight, but I have grinded some gear. Um, and for the sake of kind of seeing what I'm doing with my build here, I'll just kind of explain the itemization to you. Even this stuff isn't properly itemized for the most part. But I am going mostly for crit hit, crit damage, and brutal strike. I'm not a big fan of brutal damage, because what brutal damage does is it increases the potency of your critical strikes, based on a percentage based on the amount of brutal damage you have. So I figured it would just be a lot better to just stat critical damage, because you're not always going to be brutal striking every time you crit. So you're not always going to be taking advantage of that brute damage. However, um, the more critical damage rating you have, the higher your crits are going to be. Therefore, the higher your brutal strikes are going to be, because they do, of course, a percentage of the crit. So I decided to gear more towards crit damage, and brutal strike, or at least I try to. Obviously, on this build, I have 2,500 brute damage. Um, Looking at my crit here, it's at about 1297. This is mostly because I haven't really tried to gear Moon Knight out a whole lot. I haven't been trying to min maximum or anything. Um, but also because if you look at the talents I took, what we were just talking about, the Visage of Khonshu, it pretty much ensures you crit anyway. So with this build, I didn't feel like crit was that important, so I wasn't really going for it as hard as I normally would. For my artifacts, I just kind of threw together what I could, what I had in my bank, or my storage rather. So I took the Mayhem Demon Blood, mostly for the fighting attribute, increases his damage by an additional 8% there. And it's just got health on it and damage rating, just a very generally good artifact. Ziggurat of Kargul, which is actually a very good artifact. Mine is rolled kind of poorly. The crit damage on it is very low. But like I said, I just threw stuff on him that I had in my storage. But let's look at it for a second. When you use a movement power, increase your movement speed by 20% for 5 seconds with a 5-second cooldown. So it's basically a permanent 20% movement speed increase, which is very important because you're going to be moving a lot. And the quicker you move out of the AoEs, the more damage you can be doing. Of course, I took a Relic of Xandar for the increased damage rating to range powers. I actually did have this when I was doing the trial the first time, which a lot of you probably won't have access to a really good cosmic catalyst. But you can still get affixes on your super heroic catalysts, which you should be farming, being that you will be in super heroic difficulty prior to this. That give you like increased regeneration when you use your medkit, allows your medkit to heal you for more, or your medkit causes you to become invisible when you use it for 3 seconds, and things like that. And you always have that tech bonus down there too with a super heroic catalyst. For My medallion, I took a living laser medallion, because I mean you're using your movement power quite a bit, just to dodge things, and so that extra damage to range powers I thought would be pretty helpful. And also it's got critical damage rating on it. A lot of people have been asking on various social media outlets kind of how you should be gearing. I'm here to tell you that it's pretty much crit and crit damage, and that's it. A lot of people will say, oh, gear for your base stats up to 100% base damage. You see mine's at 96% right there, which is important, but I wouldn't go for your base stats over maybe a piece that has some critical strike and critical damage on it. Um, Brutal strike is also important as well, but I feel like if you're gearing up in superhero gear, it's more important to get as much crit as you can, and crit damage, because you're never going to brutal strike if you can't crit consistently. Um, so having a bunch of brutal strike rating and no critical strike rating just really isn't going to do you any good. So that was my build. I really hope I helped some of you guys out. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Before I go, I'm just kind of going to show you just sort of how the build works, and the most important aspects of it. So what you're going to want to do is use your explosive dart to apply vulnerability. Hit him with your bola, your fan, and the angel wing attack run. That's what you're going to be doing mostly. And then just using your spam in between it all. But also, I kind of want to show you how much your signature does.
That'll never work.
So your signature is going to be doing a lot of your damage while using Moon Knight, so you want to make sure you use that on cooldown pretty much every time it's up. You typically want to, in the heroic or the cosmic trial, I'm sorry, try and get it to where you're hitting more than just one person. Circle the enemies, try and get them to bunch up, and then go ahead and fire away. I usually wait until I can use my statue first before I use my signature for two reasons. The first one being that the statue will just increase all damage you do, increase the damage they take, but also because it'll eat your resource down, and you will gain the benefit from the buff that gives you critical strike for every 1% of your resource you're missing, and which will allow you to give your signature more of a kick there, and use it to its fullest in order to beat the clock. But anyway, I'm Judge with Judge Games. I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.